Wow.
J. Eudaly, welcome to Guitar Intelligence.
Thank you.
What do you think of that? Huh?
That's pretty
You
cool.
know, if you're on a MacBook, you can do those things. You can.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but it's nice to know I wasn't having a flashback or something. I started to get worried there for a second.
It might have made the episode much more interesting.
Yeah.
So here we are, sitting with guitars in hand. I guess we did a radio show together on Jazz Quest Radio. But
Yeah, that
before,
was that radio show actually turned out to be very significant. You might not know that.
and how's that?
Well, I can't remember what year that was, but it was before I started my Master Guitar School website.
Okay.
Okay, and that trip, that was a family vacation that I used our interview on the radio on your show there as a, business write-off.
Okay.
But my wife put the trip together, and my wife we went to Disneyland. My wife wasn't with me that night when I did your radio show. We went our separate ways, which is kind of the way we do things. And she does her thing and I do mine.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, our 46th anniversary is tomorrow.
Oh, well, congratulations.
So I won the lottery with that woman.
Let me give you some
There we go. Ticker tape. I don't know. Will that work for me? Oh,
it should. Well, if you got to stay still but it's a MacBook thing, so I don't know.
hey,
Yeah, see, look. There you go, dude. You have the powers.
Anyway, so after the trip to LA, we had a cabin in Yosemite and we had a big extended family get together. So I did your radio show and we talked about my book and, all that stuff. And when we were at Yosemite, I had a nephew tell me that I should buy a book. It was Jeff Walker's Launch was the name of the book by Jeff Walker. He had to read this book in a marketing class. He's was a business major. So anyway, I didn't think much of it. I put the name of the book in my wallet. He said, "Man, you should read this book." I read this book and I said, "Uncle Jay's got the perfect thing for this." And it was all about how to sell stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. And so anyway, I came home. I sold a book to a teacher, guitar player teacher in Pensacola named Kenny Salter. And I didn't think anything about it. It was just a book. I was selling books through my website at this point. But book sales, like CD sales, they were going down. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
CD thing went away. The physical book thing went away.
Yeah.
But anyway, Kenny bought a book, and I didn't think anything of it. So then he contacted me and wanted to take lessons over the internet to make sure that he understood the book, understood the concepts and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, cool, because I had this network of teachers that were using my books. They would buy books from me at wholesale and sell them to their students at retail. Everybody makes a little bit of money. My books are being used by hundreds and hundreds of students that I don't teach.
Yeah.
Which it was a little, network that I had built up. And I was thinking, okay, here's another guitar teacher that can, sell my books. Well, it turns out he didn't have any personal students. He just sold guitar lessons over the internet. This was like 2013 or 14 or 15, somewhere around in there. And he'd been doing this since 2003. So I gave him some lessons. That when he said that, it went right over my head. I was like, the only thing I thought reacted to was like, oh crap, he doesn't sell books.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I was still back in the old paradigm,
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'm trying to make this real short because it's a very long story. Anyway, I read Jeff Walker's book and I was like, wow, my nephew's right. I have the perfect thing. So I have all this lesson content. I just didn't have it designed for the internet. And it has to be self-teaching, I
Yeah.
mean, if you're downloading PDF guitar lessons, the PDFs have to be self-contained. And my book wasn't designed that way. It
Yeah.
requires an instructor. So I had to redo my whole method.
Yeah.
And I'm still in the process of that. But anyway, I started. I redesigned the website for down, with the idea that students would download. So I had to set up all this infrastructure and stuff. Anyway, Kenny helped me with that, but it's funny because I started the very first launch that I did, which was about 2013 or 2014, somewhere around in there. I started, foreshadowing the launch, my first launch, and I had about 300 subscribers at this point. I mean, very small, list. And Kenny contacted me, said, "Hey, man, I can help you with this. This is what I do." And I'm like, "You mean like you can sell my product, my lessons to your list?" And he goes, "Yeah, man." And I said, "Well, I'm really interested in that, but I want to do it with my own list first because I've never done this before. And if I screw things up, I want it to be with my list, not somebody else's. You know what I mean?" So anyway, the launch had a couple of major problems, and it was extremely stressful. And Kenny helped me a lot, get through this. And even in spite of all the problems I had, I made enough money that I was going like, okay, this could be worth it, because I had people that had to click through multiple times in some cases to download, and I still made enough money.
Yeah.
In spite of all the problems, to convince me that this was worth it. And so I was talking, and Kenny helped me a lot in this crisis, and, and I was talking to him afterwards. I had a road trip. I played in St. Augustine and went to Key West, or not Key West, but anyway, to Atlanta, St. Augustine. And so my wife and I decided I'm going to drive through Pensacola on the way to St. Augustine and take Kenny out to dinner, because I'd never met him in person.
Yeah.
So we met Kenny and his wife, went out to dinner. And I asked him, I said, "So how did you find my website? How did you find my website to know to buy my book?" And I have to say, before when I was foreshadowing the launch, and Kenny contacted me and said, "I can help you with this," and I said, "I'm getting ready to do a Jeff Walker style launch. Do you know what that is?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I know Jeff well. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the case studies in his book."
Ah.
And I went, "Holy crap!"
The stars are aligning.
Yeah, it was like, and that's just the beginning of it. So Kenny was actually in the book that had inspired me to do this, set up this whole thing to begin with.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that. And he didn't know it either until I said I was going to do a Jeff Walker style launch, and hey,
look, your emojis are working.
Yeah. So anyway, when we were out to dinner with Kenny, I asked him, "So how did you know how to buy my book? How did you find my website?" And he goes, "Oh, I heard you on the radio."
Jazz Quest Radio.
Yes. He heard that Jazz Quest radio show that I did with you in LA,
Yeah.
which was the same trip that my nephew gave me Jeff Walker's book.
Yeah.
And then Kenny signed up and bought a book. And then Kenny helped me through this nightmare scenario that I was out of my depth,
Yeah.
you know, on the doing this launch stuff.
So what's my cut?
Well,
No.
your cut is you got to interview me.
Maybe there's something that's happening right now that we don't know about, right?
You never know, man. You never know. And when you teach,
Well, and I wouldn't be sitting here probably, especially Jazz Quest Radio, had I
right,
not taken lessons from you when I was 19
right,
years old.
right. I saw one of your first tattoos, man.
Yeah. I don't even know where it's at anymore.
I think you've covered it up.
But yeah, and I was thinking about what because I've had three mentors, music mentors, primary music mentors. You were the first, and I was, as you know, I was a rock and roller. But what stuck with me is triads, knowing all my triads everywhere on the fretboard, and seventh chords. And that was the main takeaway. And I basically, something I was going to mention to you as far as seventh chords is, in a way, I haven't progressed past seventh chords in the sense that I figured out that I could use seventh chords for everything. So like if I'm playing like a D minor 7, then I can play off of the third and play an F major 7, and that makes it a D minor 9, and
right.
then I could play it off the fifth and play A minor 7, and that makes it a D minor 11. Or I could even play C major 7, then I'm playing off of the 7th,
right.
and I'm adding the
right.
So
right, the seventh chords are building blocks. They're building blocks to more extensions and alterations and stuff. The thing about the guitar is the limitations. You only have 6 strings and 4 fingers,
yes.
5 if you use your thumb.
So you can't play.
Yeah, it's not linear.
Yeah.
And so when you start adding extensions, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and you start altering those, flat 9, sharp 9, so on.
You're basically playing scales at a certain point.
Well,
kind of.
Things, eventually everything integrates. And it's the old hippie saying, everything is everything. Chords are vertical scales, and scales are linear chords.
Yeah. Okay.
But the point is, on the guitar, you can't play 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Because you don't have
enough strings.
Yeah, you don't have enough strings, and it's tuned in fourths. So playing closed voice chords, that is chords that are in numerical order, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, it becomes impossible. It's too big of a stretch. So you have to start leaving notes out.
Yep.
And you have to figure out what notes are expendable.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you wind up doing is you take your seventh chords and all your seventh chord inversions, and you realize
that's another thing that I learned with you. And the seventh chords, like that's how I built everything is off of those first.
So if you like using the example that you were using, the D minor 9 being F major 7, F major 7 over D is D minor 9. What we've done is just eliminate the root.
Yep.
That's the bass player's job.
That's right.
Okay. So we're working, even though the tonality is D minor, we're working in an F major tonality. So all my F major 7 inversions are also D minor 9 inversions. Everything has multiple functions.
Yes.
And you can even break it down into triads. F major 7 is A minor over F.
Yeah. Yep.
So now over a D minor 7 chord or any kind of D minor tonality, I can play in D minor. I can solo in. I can think in D minor. I can think in F major. I can think in A minor. Do some blues licks, and it's all.
Intervallically, it's changing.
Yeah, it's like my brain. My brain knows I'm in D minor, but my hand thinks I'm in F major or A minor or whatever extension I choose to imply.
And shape-wise, you don't really, at least as far as my life has gone, it's like I can get away with a lot by knowing just a few shapes as long as I know how the shapes relate to the chord I'm playing over.
Yeah, see, when I play, when I'm performing, it sounds like I have a lot more chops than I really do.
So maybe that was the question I'm getting to. Are you basically kind of applying that same sort of information, or you know a lot of
Yes.
shapes for like all
What
that other
what
stuff?
what I realized when I was about 13, I taught myself by listening to records, right? We didn't
Yep.
have YouTube. This would be late 60s, mid to late 60s. And I was especially into Cream and Hendrix. And I would put the needle on the record
Yep.
and I would hunt and peck and hunt and peck and hunt and
Yep.
peck
I know
until I
that story.
found that sound. And that's how I figured out what I later learned to be the minor pentatonic scale.
Or a minor 11 arpeggio.
That came later.
Same thing, right?
Yeah. I had this pattern and I had an extension. I called it an extension of that pattern.
Yep. BB box.
Right. And I understood that the guitar repeated itself above the 12th fret. So I could move that same pattern 12 frets up.
Yep.
Right. And you gain an extra register, but
Yep.
it's all the same thing.
Exactly.
So I had this pentatonic thing, although I didn't know pentatonic. I didn't know the language. I didn't know any technical terms. You know, I had this down stone cold, man. I could play it. I could play it fast. I could,
Yeah.
do all this stuff. Then I understood that it was minor. Then I figured out a major sound.
Same notes, different emphasis.
Right. Well, I learned the major, hunt and peck, hunt and peck, hunt and peck, same way I learned the minor. Very laborious, tedious, and inefficient way to learn. But that's how I learned. And then one day, I was 13 or 14, I was jacking around with my C major. I understood the minor went across the neck like this, and the major kind of went diagonally.
Okay.
The major,
Yeah.
yeah, and the minor
Yeah.
went like that. I realized on my major, after the first note,
It's the minor.
that was the same pattern as the fifth string, third fret major pattern was the same thing as the sixth string, fifth fret minor pattern. I didn't know C, I didn't know A, I didn't know pentatonic. I just had these patterns worked out. And I realized that after the first note, hey, this is the same thing as this minor pattern with the extension in it, right?
Yeah.
And so I go, I wonder if this first note here is somewhere else in that minor pattern. And I hunt and pecked and found it there.
Yeah.
And that's when the light bulb went on over my head and I went, crap. If I'd only known about this relationship, fifth string, third fret, sixth string, fifth fret, fifth string, third fret's major, sixth string, fifth fret's minor.
Yep.
I could have avoided all the hunt and peck stuff on the major stuff, by realizing this relationship, I could have doubled my vocabulary with a concept.
Well, and I always say it's like I always tell people it's the devil horns because it's the
that
pinky major, index minor.
Right. But the realization was the same notes have more than one function.
Depending on the chord that you're playing over.
And so this major and this minor are the same mechanics. They're completely different sound. They're completely different theoretically. They have a different color. They have a different emotion. It's relative to what you're playing against, but the mechanics are the same. And it's the mechanics that take all the time and the effort and the blood, sweat, and the tears, right?
Yeah.
So if you can maximize the function of your mechanic work, your technique work, you save yourself a crap ton of time and effort.
Well, I'm so glad that you said that because I always teach and my what is the my ideology basically is that it's mind, body, and spirit, and mind is the information, body is the physical ability to play the information, and spirit, of course, is the feel in which you play it. And it's like you can have there's certainly plenty of players who have lots of technique and no feel. You know, a lot of people who know a lot of how music works but can't play it. You know what I mean? And all it's so the what's the word? To have the three of them, the trifecta, is the mind, the body, and the spirit, the physical ability. And so a lot of people resist music theory, but they don't realize that they've already got a lot of, if they know the patterns, they've already got most of the work done. They just need to figure out how it works.
Right.
So that was like me in the seventh chords. It's like once I realized that those seventh chord patterns, if I knew major 7, minor 7, and dominant 7 and half diminished, I basically knew all of the other chords. I mean, I knew how to solo over all of the chords.
Well, you open a can of worms there. I mean, I could talk forever about all those three things that you talked about. But the point I'm making is you can maximize the function of your technique work through the intellect.
Yes.
Through the theory.
That's the trifecta.
Right. People who disrespect theory,
and there's a lot of them.
Oh yeah, I run into this all the time.
I call them the feel players on the music theory groups. Who all they add to the group is laughing emojis to serious inquiries. And snarky comments. About how Eddie Van Halen didn't need no theory, even though he met David Lee Roth in composition class, and he took a college course in music but didn't ever learn to read, and won piano competitions. The whole thing is like smokescreen. You know what I mean?
Right. The people who avoid theory relegate themselves to doing a crap ton of work for very little return.
Yes.
What you want to do is a crap ton of work and maximize the return.
And even the feel thing, it's like I realized early on, and it's like the sounds that appeal to me the most is when I'm in a minor, like a flat 5 and the 9. And then when I'm in a major, I like the major 7, the sharp 4, and the 9. So because I realized whenever I'm playing with feeling, there's certain sounds that would always resonate with me. And I was like, why does that sound so good every time I do that? And then when I realized, it's like, oh, well, that's a go-to note, regardless of what key or chord you're playing over. And it's not just, oh, I got lucky that time.
Yeah. Okay. I mean? So on this issue of feeling. Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
It's a quandary, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's very easy to understand. feeling in music is supplied by the listener, not the performer.
But the performer's primary goal is to become the listener in a sense, isn't it? To leave the theory, because when you're playing, you don't want to be thinking, and the feeling is you want to be feeling, I guess.
Okay.
But because you are the listener at that point.
When you are in the audience and you say, "Man, that guy's playing with a lot of feeling," you're not talking about his feeling. You can't feel what he
feeling.
Exactly.
Yes.
You're talking about your feeling. Something the performer is doing is causing an emotional response in the listener, who then projects their own response back onto the performer.
That's what I've always said about, like, that could be applied to falling in love. It's the same thing.
It's anything. Okay. So the question, as a performer, the question then becomes, what is it that I do or that I can do that will cause an emotional response in the listener and cause them to perceive that I'm playing with feeling?
And it's related to frequencies.
The answer to that is not playing with feeling. The answer to that, what causes the emotional response in the listener, is playing with inflection.
Okay.
Okay.
Go on.
Okay. So I had to figure this out very early in my performing career, because I was performing 6 nights a week minimum. There were periods of times where I was playing 13 gigs a week.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Okay. You
learn a lot doing that.
Yeah. There's no substitute for it.
Yeah. I agree.
And one of the things, when I first started out, it was a mystery to me. Why, certain nights I suck.
Yeah.
Right. I had a fight with my wife. I don't feel good. I haven't had enough sleep, whatever. I'm not into it. And I'm just going through the motions.
You're playing with feeling, but the feeling as a negative.
I'm just playing
instead of a positive.
I'm not
autopilot.
Autopilot. I'm not having a good night. And people would come up to me and go, "Dude,
that was amazing.
That was amazing. Do you give lessons?"
Yeah, I know that.
And
feeling.
Initially, my reaction was totally self-centered or narcissistic. It was like, well, and I would never say this to somebody, but this is what I thought. That shows what an idiot you are, because I obviously suck tonight and you're too stupid to even tell the difference.
Yeah.
And the opposite would happen. I'm bad, man. I'm nationwide. I am kicking ass. I can't make a mistake. Everything I try, I pull it off, and nothing.
Yeah. What'd you think? Yeah, that's okay.
You need to play with more feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, I was totally into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I know that.
So I'm like, what is this disconnect? There's a disconnect between what I'm feeling and what this person or that person or the audience in general is feeling. And it's like, sometimes, there wasn't a disconnect. It was happening.
Yeah.
I'm kicking ass. People are responding. It's awesome, but not consistently.
Yeah.
And I won't go into all that again, because it's a long story, man. It's 6 nights a week, 50 weeks a year for a couple of decades.
And so what's the answer?
The answer is, the thing that causes an emotional response in the listener is playing with inflection. Okay. And inflection is the result of technique.
Yes.
Okay. Technique inflection when I talk, right? We do this all the time intuitively. I say intuitively, but it's learned.
Yeah.
You learn to talk, you sound kind of like your mom and dad.
So autopilot in essence is just as effective to the listener because
If you've trained yourself to play with inflection on autopilot.
yes.
Okay. So when I talk and I ask a question, my voice goes up at the end, right?
Yep.
When I
Yep.
give an answer, my voice, I have a downward
Yep.
inflection, right? Uh, Anything I can do, like I stress syllables when I'm talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There were bends, there were slurs, there were hammer ons, all that stuff. Anything I can do to make one note sound different from another is what I call an inflective device.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody who's a communicator, a politician, a preacher, a musician, if they're an effective communicator, they use inflection to create an emotional response in the listener. Like if I was, George Bush, I have a dream that one day our children will be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Or Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream
Yes.
that one day, right?
Yeah.
It's the delivery.
Yes. Well, you're making me feel a lot better about my autopilot days because
Yeah. Yeah.
I certainly have had a lot of those.
So I won't get, I won't get into all the lessons that taught me this.
I used to spend like when I would do recording, even when cut and paste came into play, when I'd be doing recordings, I would always, play every part.
Right.
Even if the same part occurred time and time again, I would always play. And I would seriously spend sometimes, 40 minutes on a note with the vibrato because I wanted it to
Right.
match the tempo of the song perfectly.
Right.
Or
Right.
if a bend with vibrato or whatever. So I
Right.
think that it's all of those years of those minuscule elements that enabled me to, I guess, play on autopilot with some
Right.
effect on the
Right.
listener,
So,
not necessarily me because it feels like I'm just going like I'm
right.
not.
How you feel about your performance is not trustworthy.
Yeah, that's right. It's irrelevant, really. I
Yeah,
mean,
it is. It is because you, by definition, you cannot be objective.
unless you hit the only thing would be if you hit a bad note, and even that note could be interpreted. Sometimes you can listen back. Like I remember, doing.
Oh yeah, that was the leading tone.
Doing all those radio shows. Tommy and I must have done 800 shows, or I don't know how many shows, but we would play on every episode. And sometimes I would leave the station thinking, oh my God, I just
Yeah.
played a clunker on live radio.
Right.
And I would get home and I'd listen to it and I was like, man, that note
Wasn't so bad.
it was, well, and sometimes it was like sublime, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
what was that note? I want to do
Yeah.
that again, but I don't even know what I did. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I have a similar story that's more extreme. That was the straw that broke the camel's back on this issue for me.
Okay.
I had realized all this and I said, okay, so what I need to do is play with lots of inflection by habit.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
I need to train myself to play with. And that way, even if I'm not into it, my default, I have a certain level of performance that's my default, no matter how
Yes.
bad I feel. Right.
Yeah. I feel the same.
Right. And so this inflection thing is not just auditory, it's also visual. It's acting.
Yeah.
Right. Because when you're in the crowd and you say that guy's playing with feeling, you don't know that. He might be acting.
Yes.
All good performers are good actors.
Yeah. I always say eyebrows. It's like when you watch the news with the sound off, it's like eyebrows up. Hey,
Yeah.
look at the puppy. Eyebrows
Yeah.
down and other
Right.
news.
Exactly.
And I'll give you I did a show at the Key Club on Sunset Strip. It was, we had to pay like $800 because it was pay to play for
Uh-huh.
40 minutes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of our first big shows. And I was out there and I was doing shred instrumentals.
Uh-huh.
And and of course, I want to be Mr. Fancy Pants and come out of the gate with the most intense thing possible to play, which is the hardest song in the set, probably, which is probably not the best idea to make that the first song. But I
Right.
came out and my heart was beating like a hummingbird. And I remember I came out and I could feel my eyebrows down. And then I just put my eyebrows up and I smiled and the notes came out effortlessly. It was almost like the eyebrows down were making it really hard and then the eyebrows up and I was able to play. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, I don't
So is
assign
that
it.
acting, or is it at the same time you can psychologically
Yeah,
redirect yourself?
Yeah, I would say it was more redirection,
Yeah.
but like I don't, maybe I'm, too much of a skeptic. I'm kind of skeptical of my skepticism, but, uh, but I demonstrate it with students like this. Watch my face. Now watch my face.
Yeah.
Which felt right. They both
Yeah.
felt different, right? I played exactly the same thing, but inflection is more than just auditory. We do it when we talk. When I stress a syllable, right? I stress. Yeah. See, my head moves, my hand moves, my eyebrows go up. I'm stressing. So when I play, you see?
Yep.
That's acting.
That's how people look when they feel something.
Right.
Yeah. And Steve Vai, played with David Lee Roth. He said that what he learned from Roth was if you have to sacrifice a lick or a move, sacrifice the lick.
Right.
Because the move is projecting what you're trying to play in a physical way.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. So you can't have too much inflection.
Yeah.
Pinched harmonics, pull-offs, hammer-ons, slurred. Yeah, all that stuff. And accent. It doesn't have to be super extreme. Like Steve Vai, I mean, he's pretty extreme.
Yeah. He has a lot of inflection, maybe more inflection than anyone on.
But I'm talking about the physicality.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be really extreme. It can be subtle, just like when we talk.
I think it's, and it's probably so autopilot for a player who's been playing for a number of decades. It comes naturally because it's almost like the expression is tied to what it is that you're playing. And for me, my thing that drives me crazy is licks. You know what I mean? When I'm improvising, when I go on autopilot, then I tend to play what I know works.
Right.
I know this will work, so I'm going to play this.
Right.
And even though I have, I have a look that goes along with the lick.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it's like the licks have looks that go along with them. You know what I mean?
Licks have looks. Licks have colors.
But I guess
licks have textures and emotions.
There's two schools of thought on that because there are some old jazzers that would say if you're not playing wrong notes, you're not playing jazz. You know what I mean? Or you're not taking chances. And then there's another school of thought whenever you try to play something clever, that's when you usually fall on your face. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like play what you know and not what you don't know. When you're performing, you should be playing what you've been practicing and not. But I guess it just depends on the circumstances or how you're feeling that day, I guess.
Well, to me, that issue, I know jazz players.
Do you consider yourself a jazz player? I mean, you play jazz, obviously, but I mean, you grew up with Hendrix and Cream.
Yeah. No, I'm more eclectic, but jazz is super important to me in many ways. One way is that what I call a jazz attitude. Okay. It's improvisational. For instance, it's not that, okay, like contrasting jazz and classical music. Okay, the the theoretical content is the same. Okay, the harmony and the theory of jazz is Western European. It comes from the classical. I mean, you hear all these stories about Charlie Parker listening to Stravinsky.
Yeah.
All that
going
stuff.
to the library and reading through his
Yeah. So what the difference is, a classical attitude, whether I'm a rock player or a jazz player or some weird genre, a classical attitude considers, let's say, the recorded version of the song.
It's more physical. You're in a cover band essentially if you're in a classical orchestra, unless
the recreating the definitive version of the song, whether it's a recording or sheet music or whatever, that's the goal.
Okay? That's the physical aspect of playing, really, and not so
I'm talking about an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
The attitude is Cream's version of Crossroads at Winterland in San Francisco is the definitive version of that song, and I want to play it note for note. I want to play it perfectly. But
it's kind of the jazz version compared to the original Robert Johnson song because it's a completely.
I'm just talking about okay. Like, say you're in a tribute band, right? You're in
That's
a tribute
the classical
band.
attitude,
right? The goal is to recreate Crossroads from Winterland, 1967. And you have the argument, well, Clapton never played that the same way twice. And the response of that person would be, but that's the way he played it that time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm not dissing that. Okay. I'm just talking about the attitude. The recorded version is the goal. The jazz attitude is the recorded version is the jumping off. That's the starting point.
That's the template.
Yeah. That we're going to start with this, and we're going to take it somewhere that maybe the original guy that recorded that never even thought of. Okay. So if I'm going to play that kind of attitude, the classical attitude, I'm going to play Mustang Sally just like Wilson Pickett did it. The jazz attitude is I'm going to play Mustang Sally and take it somewhere Wilson Pickett never even thought of.
Yeah.
Okay. To me, the jazz attitude or the classical attitude, that's the result of a personality type.
Yeah.
It's a personality type. And the guys, I have friends that play in cover bands, and they're not cover bands, but tribute bands. They're great at it. I totally respect it. But that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not my personality type. I go crazy. I go crazy doing that.
Me too.
But I respect the guys that do it well. And in some cases, I have friends, I would call them journeyman musicians, that play with some of the biggest names in the world, and they're hired to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's their job.
If James Taylor is paying you $10,000 a week to play James Taylor songs to back him up, you're going to need to play those James Taylor parts perfectly every time, just like if you were in a tribute band.
Yeah. You are in a tribute band in a sense. I mean, as far as that mentality.
Right. So, but my personality type is not that. It's improvisational. Yeah. And that's why I was drawn to Cream and to Hendrix and those kinds of groups, because they were improvisational. And I realized I was more concerned. I never learned Eric Clapton solos or Jimi Hendrix solos note for note, because I realized they didn't even play them the same way.
Yeah.
What I was concerned about was how are they thinking? How are they coming up with these things? What's the vocabulary?
Yes.
What are they drawing from in making these choices to play it different this night from the next night?
Yeah.
You know,
I always tell students, I said, if you don't learn what you're talking about, what happens if you've practiced the solo, you know, you've got it down, it's your big night, and then as soon as the very first note of the solo, you break your second string.
right.
And then what?
Yeah.
Because you've memorized the solo that you can no longer play.
Yeah.
You know what
right.
I mean?
Right. Okay. So, well, when I was working with Kevin Mahogany, we were doing a showcase one night. There were about 4 different bands, and you had a 45-minute set. And you needed pow, 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 pow. It was all industry people. It was booking agents and club owners and, you know, A&R guys.
Suits.
Yeah. And this was before Kevin became famous as a jazz singer and an interpreter of the Great American Songbook. And we were doing all kinds of bizarre stuff. We were doing fusion stuff and contemporary R&B, and I was playing Charvel Jackson with a Floyd Rose.
I see danger already.
Yeah, and so we're in the middle. We're in the middle. We're in the middle of a set, and we're in the middle of the set, and I break a string, and everything goes wonky.
Yeah.
Right, and we can't stop to take the time for me to change the string.
Yeah.
And so we continued on the set, and I figured out that if I
guitar tuned now?
Yeah, if I stayed between the 3rd and the 9th fret and transpose everything a half step down, I was more or less in tune.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And so I had to revoice all the chords. I had to play all the solos differently. I had to keep it within this area, and I got through the rest of the set that way.
Yeah.
And the bass player in this band is one of the most musically knowledgeable and literate musicians I've ever worked with. And most people had no clue what had happened, you know.
And he probably said, "Man, you played with a lot of feeling tonight."
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm sweating buckets, you know.
Yeah.
And we got done, and the bass player turned to me and he said, "Man, that was the most amazing thing I have ever seen." And the reason I could do that was because I'm improvisational. I enjoy flying by the seat of my pants, and I'm musically knowledgeable enough to figure out what had happened and to my instrument and what I needed to do to compensate for that. And I had to do that on the fly in the middle of the set.
Yeah.
And a guy who has a classical attitude would not be able to deal with that situation.
Yeah.
You know,
it's monkey. I call it not. I guess it is insulting. I shouldn't even say it. I call it monkey see, monkey do. It's kind of like,
yeah, it's by rote.
It's
you know,
yeah.
But
again, it is respectable to see someone be able to. You know, I have a student who's he's studying. He wants to shred with me, but he's also going to college for classical music. And when I watch his solo performance, even though, you know, it's not technically perfect, but I'm just imagining myself sitting in that chair, and it's like that. It just, you know, that is not me.
Yeah.
To sit in that chair and play something complex that I memorized, that's
okay.
So is difficult.
So the level of technique and the level of control that classical players have is definitely something to aspire to.
Yes.
And I studied classical guitar for 3 years with Douglas Neat at the Conservatory of Music here in Kansas City. And he's a protege of Christopher Parkening. He studied in Spain with Andre Segovia himself. This guy's one of the best classical guitar players in the world. And I can't tell you the value that I got out of those lessons. And when I quit my lessons with Doug, I had started studying with John Elliott, who was my jazz theory mentor.
Yeah.
Right. And I wound up studying with John for 7 years. And I studied with Doug for 3 years. And there was a little bit of time where those two things overlapped. I was a classical guitar performance major at the conservatory. That was the only way I could study privately with Doug Neat. And that's what I was after.
Yeah.
I didn't care about the degree, and I didn't care about all the other crap I had to do, piano classes and composition classes and all that stuff. I'd hate to see my transcript, man, because I bugged out on all that stuff. Well, I was playing 6 nights a week, you know. I couldn't go to school during the day. All I wanted to do was study with Doug for 45 minutes a week. That was my lessons with Doug, and I didn't care about anything else. And I got in with John, and I started studying with John, and I was practicing. My degree program required me to practice 6 hours a day on the classical guitar on the stuff with Doug.
Yep.
And I started studying with John, and I was gigging every night, and it was like, this is too much. I need to sacrifice something. I couldn't sacrifice the gigging. I was married, and I think by the time I started with John, my wife was pregnant with our first kid. So I couldn't quit gigging because that was all I was doing. And so I went into Doug and I told him, I said, man, you know, I'm going to have to quit my lessons. I've started studying with John Elliott, and that's really the direction that I want to go, you know. And Doug goes, oh, he goes, I've heard of that guy. He goes, you know, I can play some jazz. I go, really? He goes, yeah, listen to this. So he plays me Blue Rondo a la Turk. It's a Dave Brubeck tune.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know, 9/8 or something.
I always thought Brubeck kind of had that classical.
Yeah, it had, you know, part of it was in 7 or 9 and part of it's in 4. And Doug is like, got the bass lines, the chords, the melody, variations on the theme, you know, and then he segues straight from that into take 5, and he does take 5. And it was just jaw dropping. And he got done, and I said, man, as long as I live, I will never be that good. But I have a question. He goes, what is it? I go, was any of that improvised? And he goes, no. He goes, I arranged it, I scored it out, and I practiced it until I can play it perfect without a mistake.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, then it wasn't jazz. It was 20th century classical music.
Yeah.
And he nodded his head and he said, I can see that.
Totally. Yeah.
That's the difference in attitude.
Well, that's me. That's me with the mind, body, spirit. I say jazz is mind, classical is body, and blues is spirit. You know, and that's the, you know, I did classical for a year, but I feel like it was essential.
Oh yeah,
to have,
man. Especially the technique work.
When I was like 18, yeah, it was with what's his name, Joe. You know, the teacher,
Joe English.
Joe English. I did a year with Joe English, and he was always giving me the business about the claw because I had and never. Yeah. But I wasn't studying to be a classical player. I just wanted all of the classical information. Right. Because I love Randy Rhoads.
Right. Joe's a very good classical
but yeah,
player.
We did a full year, and we worked on a few, you know, bunch of different stuff. But one piece we did, it was like 4 or 5 pages, and for a whole year. And I was so glad that I got through and was able to play it, even with my, you know, poor right hand technique.
Yeah.
But
I didn't get near as far with the classical as I would have liked. But there are certain classical techniques that I can't do that I wish I could. But but I felt like I was at a kind of a crossroads in my life and my career, and I needed to make a choice. And I went with what I knew. There was no question
I
in
think
my
that you're
mind.
right about personality types
Yeah.
because uh, you teach enough students and you see it, and
Uh-huh.
you realize that certain students are never going to, and really the improvisational aspect of it is pretty rare, and I think what's even maybe more rare than that is compositional. I'd say out of 5,000 students, the ones who were able to write their own songs was pretty small. You know what I mean? Especially,
Yeah, you have to be
writing almost comes
highly
from it.
motivated.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could write songs from a classical perspective, obviously, but it's
Well, a
almost
classic
comes.
a
Yeah, go ahead.
classical composer is an improviser.
Yeah, that's what I'm. They say that Bach and Beethoven and all them guys that a lot of their material was improvised and written
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
So yeah, so the improvisation leads to composition,
right.
and that's what do they call it? Well, it's real time composition, right?
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean when you're
There's,
improvising.
and there things, it's not like an either or thing. It's a continuum, and people reside at different points in the continuum.
Yes.
Like for instance, there's a place in jazz for classical attitude. That would be the big band.
Well, right now I'm working on learning the Donna Lee head
Yeah,
because I felt like I needed that.
man.
I hadn't buckled down in a while. It's like I need to buckle down and learn something that's
I tell you,
difficult.
man, practicing Charlie Parker heads will make you a better guitar player. I'll tell
Yeah.
you that right off the bat.
I'd
But
play
like
some, but I just started, so I don't want to embarrass myself.
in a jazz big band, those parts are written out just like a classical score, and the guys are reading. They're reading the parts, and you have two, maybe three soloists that will
Yeah.
improvise. They'll stand up and they'll improvise a solo, but that solo has a strictly defined number of bars.
Yes.
It can only be this long because this thing is very arranged.
Can I
Like a
interject for just a second? I was going to
Yeah.
say that my second mentor, Ray McCarty down in Austin, Texas, taught me about form. So he taught me
Uh-huh.
about 12 bars, AABA, and like the Latin 16 bars, and the next 16 bars is slightly different, or
Mm-hmm.
and had me listening a lot. So I was listening to. He's turning me on to, all the greats, Miles Davis
Mm-hmm.
and Coltrane and Monk and all that. And then when I studied with Max Bennett he was my third major mentor, and I was with him for about 8 years. And all we did, and while I was doing it, it was torturous, and I understood it, but I was just like, "Are we going to ever get to the good stuff?" But all we did was syncopated 16th notes. That's all we did. And he had this metronome that had like a gallop,
Shuffle. Yeah.
and he was like, but he would say stuff like he would say. He go, listen to this, and he put on like a 18-piece big band that he played part of, and it's like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he'd say, here it is, and then he goes, imagine you show up and there's 18 guys in that room, and everyone's killing it, but you're the one guy who's just a little off. You know what I mean? He goes, that's it.
Yeah.
He goes, you want to. The thing is, his thing was about what I got from him more than anything else was that he was in the studio business for a long time. I mean, he played on frickin' everything, not only Hot Rats but Sinatra and just Billie Holiday he toured with, and Miles Davis, and played with Parker on stage.
Mm-hmm.
But all that stuff he did, when he was in the studio, he said every single session, you play it right the first time or your career is over.
Right.
He goes, if I'm in a room and it's just a band, and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
you have a choir and an orchestra, maybe there's 200 people in the room because you've got audio engineers and producers, and
Right.
if it's a movie soundtrack, people from the from the film or whatever. And he goes, and then they put that sheet in front of your face and you play. And if you're the guy where they have to stop, run it again, that's it.
Yeah.
You don't get called back. And so he really put that pressure on me to how important it is to play it right. You know what I mean? And especially with those syncopated 16s. And I was talk about buckets of sweat. I mean, every time I was sitting there with Max, because he was kind of hostile towards me. You know what I mean? But he was like, and one day he finally said, because we were running this piece, it was like, I don't know, it was just like a couple of bars, a couple of measures. And it was like, and he was like, do it again, do it again, do it again. And like for like 40 minutes. And I'm just like sweating and I'm thinking I'm dead on. And you know what I mean? And then he stopped and he's like, I'm only doing this because I believe in you. You know what I mean? And I'm just trying to figure out how can I, you know, break through to you and get you to do it. Cause I know you can do it. And that's why I'm on you. And I was like, that was finally the day. And that was after like a year or two, you know what I mean? But, so yeah, that's that whole the classical element of jazz. It's like, he's like, you got to play it right. And then when it came to the improvisation, you know, it only enhances your skills to be able to play it right. And maybe that's where the whole autopilot kind of comes from, right? Is just the physical ability, the confidence to play with conviction, even when you don't feel like it.
Right. You fake it.
Yeah.
You're not really faking it, but it feels like you're faking it to you.
And the licks, you know, I guess in a improvisational sense is you're playing, you're putting them in different places and you're playing, you know, this is a new experience. And that's, I was listening to the audiobook Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner. I don't know if you ever read that book.
I never read it, but I've heard about it.
It's pretty good, but he's like, you know, you play what's meant to be played. At that time, it's almost as though it's destiny. You can think after the gig, you can think of a million things you would have rather played or whatever. But he's like, whatever was meant to be played at that moment, that's what was played. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You play it and then you leave it.
Yeah. You gotta leave it be. I used to be so critical, and then it took a long time to break through that wall.
Yeah.
To where you could just let it go.
The straw that I never got around to the straw that broke the camel's back on my feeling is supplied by the listener.
Okay.
Yeah, I had trained because it applies to this. I had trained myself to play with inflection. You know, I had been doing it for several years. I had figured it out. And I had just trained night after night after night, whether I feel it or not. I'm doing this, you know.
Yeah.
Doing all, you know, yeah.
Eyebrows up, eyebrows down.
Right. And acting technique, you know, and you internalize it.
Yeah.
You know, so that just
the
like
licks have looks.
Yeah, just like when you talk.
Yeah.
You do it. You do it when you talk. My head's moving, my eyebrows move, my hands move. It's an integration of the visual and the audible and, you know, everything. So anyway, I had 2 wisdom teeth surgically removed.
Been there.
Yeah. And that was on a Friday morning. I played the gig Friday night. You know, I've been worse off on a gig. Played a gig Saturday night. The last gig of the week, it was a week stand, was on Sunday night. I woke up Sunday morning vomiting fresh blood. And I'd been bleeding at night, all night, and swallowed the blood and cooked it all up.
Yeah.
And we got the dentist off the golf course Sunday morning. He resutured my mouth and he said, you have a bleeding problem. If you're still bleeding by 5:00 tonight, I'm putting you in the hospital. And I just laid on the couch all day. Stayed out of the hospital. The bass player picked me up because I wasn't supposed to drive. I was on double doses of Tylenol 3. My face was swollen out to here. And I go to the gig. And this is 80s rock. The front person was a woman, a Joan Jett type woman, leather, good looking, high energy. And I can't even stand up. And I play the whole gig sitting on a bar stool with my head down like this, complete automatic pilot. I suck and I don't care. I just got to physically get through this gig so I can go home and go to bed. And it just so happened that was the night the bass player taped the gig. So 3 or 4 weeks later, I'm sitting down to listening to the tapes, preparing myself to be thoroughly humiliated because I remembered how bad I felt, how much I sucked, and how much I didn't care. And I listened to the tape, and it was like, nothing wrong with it. Sound fine.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's it. I give up.
I'm going to stop caring.
Yeah. I stopped caring. And my priority, that was in probably 1984. My priority flipped instantly from how good I am to how much fun I was having.
Yeah.
And my priority ever since then, how much fun am I having?
Even if you're not having fun, it's still sometimes.
You look for the fun.
Yeah.
I try to find the fun, and whether I'm any good or not, I have no clue, man.
I had one where I was in Austin. I had gotten a really bad case of poison ivy. And it was on my arm right here. Even some of my ink came out, but it was like a bubbling mass.
Ugh.
And it was so bad that it entered my bloodstream.
And then it's all over.
And then it starts popping up everywhere. Yeah. And it alters you psychologically because it makes you feel sick,
Mm-hmm.
And I had a gig on 6th Street. And so, of course, in those days, I tried to somehow remedy the situation with alcohol. And so I added
fuel to the fire.
Yes. I added a lot of fuel, and which did not help. It was like just queasy feeling, and it's odd that I have a picture on my wall where a friend of mine who's an artist actually drew a picture of me performing, a nice picture that I framed on that particular night. So it's a memory. But because the clothes I was wearing and everything, but at that same night, I was just like at the end of the set, I was just like, it was just like the worst experience ever. And plus, the club owner yelled at me because I had a Marshall half stack, and the tone, you only get the good tone at 6, and so. But we can't play at 6 in that venue. Right. I had to turn my amp and face it backwards against the wall and turn it down to like 4. The tone was crap. I was feeling horrible. I went through that gig. And then at the end of the gig, a great player, a fellow teacher, his name's Mark Bish, and he's a great jazz musician. And he came up, Brett, and I was like, oh God. Mark was here. You know what I mean? And he goes, man, you're killing it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, really?
Yeah. One of the guys that I learned from, I played in a band with, he's another guitar player. He's about 15 years older than me. I was trying to figure this stuff out. And this guy consistently got ovations every single night for his solos, and I didn't. And I'm like, what is he doing? How does he do this? And I asked him, and he couldn't tell me. I said, how do you get people to respond that way, night after night after night after night? He goes, oh man, I just play, man. That's what I do. I just play. He goes, you can do it. You're better than me, man. You can play. Just play. That's what I do. And I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't know. He can't tell me. It's all intuitive with him.
Yeah. Because he's just having fun, like you said.
So I'm like, I need to figure this out. What is he doing? And I started paying really close attention to what he was doing. And he was completely self-taught, right? Played by rote, didn't know theory, He knew major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, natural minor, and a major scale, and that was about it. That was the bulk of his soloing vocabulary. And he had a lot of chops. He could, of course, he's only got 4 scales.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
man, he knows them inside out, backwards and forwards, and he could blaze, but he hardly ever did. He did things like this. With all the accompaniment. I'm like, it's inflection, facial expression, body language. And I played with this guy for several years, 2 or 3 different bands. I was playing with him when he went through a divorce. He was clinically depressed. He was sleep deprived. I knew he wasn't into it. And still, night after night after night after night, he got this response from the crowd. And
his licks had looks.
Yeah. And he couldn't explain it. He didn't have it consciously worked out. He just did it. It was just his modus operandi, And he's one of the guys where I realized it. I go, I can still play what I'm interested in, but I have to do it with inflection. And it helps if I'm playing some kind of, bitonal, some bitonal lick that, and I go through all this stuff. If I end it with, people will get that,
It's takeoffs and landings.
Right. Exactly.
I always say it's like the plane. It used to be the planes didn't crash in midair. It was always the takeoffs and landings.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I've never heard that, but yeah, I totally
come out
agree
of
with
it into. That's what I'm teaching. The student of mine who wants to shred, and I said, the main thing is no matter what kind of whatever kind of thing you're doing, just make sure that you come out with something sweet. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So
he one night with that guy on a gig, I decided I was hired to replace a keyboard player, and I was hired because I was a jazz guy, and this was in the 70s, and disco was dance music was what we were doing, and they had a keyboard player quit with no notice, and they had all these gigs booked, and they couldn't find a guy, and he was part owner of a studio that I did work in, and so he said, if we're going to have another guitar player in the band, it has to be a guy that's completely different style than mine. And so I got the call, and I was hired to replace a keyboard player. So what I was doing was arranging keyboard parts, string parts, horn parts for the guitar, and playing them. And I had 2 amps and a stereo, splitter.
Yeah.
I was trying to sound like anything but a guitar. I had all these effects, and I was playing keyboard parts and horn parts and stuff. So I wasn't an upfront guy, and I was in the back, but I had a couple of solos or 3 solos a night or whatever. And so one of these nights I decided, okay, I'd figured out what this guy does. I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get an ovation. I'm going to do that. And so we're coming up to my shining moment of glory. Right. And I'm psyching myself up. I'm talking to myself. I'm going, okay, you're not going to play fast. You're not going to do any bitonals crap. You're going to play a blues lick. It's going to be slow. You're going to wring every ounce of inflection out of every note that you possibly can. And I'm talking to myself like this. My solo comes up and I start off. And before I know it, I'm going. And in my brain, I'm going, no, you weren't going to do that. You were going to play slow. And I drove home in a state of shock going, you are totally out of control. Your chops are out of control. You couldn't play slow if your life depended on it. And I said, okay, I realized in order to play that way, fast, complicated, you have to do it all the time.
Yeah.
So am I willing to give up the upper 10% of my speed in order to get control to be more musical? And the answer was yes.
Yes.
And I've never worked on speed since. That was in October of 1979. I remember the date because it was so significant to my musical development, and the only time I work on speed is if I'm having a specific problem with a specific line, like in a Charlie Parker head.
Yeah. It seems like I learned I always tell people, it's like I practiced 12 hours a day, 7 days a week when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I developed all of my speed, all of my sweeping and tapping and shredding. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've never really practiced. I employ it.
Yeah.
But I've never practiced it. Because it's almost like once you develop it, as long as you don't stop playing for a long time. But.
Right. Another thing that I realized was that no matter how fast I could play, I always ran up against my limitation. And no matter how fast I could play, I always wished I could play a little bit faster. And that was an endless treadmill that you could never get off of.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You just got to step off of it and say, okay.
I just realized that it wasn't appealing to me as a listener beyond a certain velocity.
After the guy shreds 1,000,000 miles a minute for 5 minutes, you go, okay, now
I've heard everything. Yeah, I've heard it all. So
and
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I just resigned myself to living my life not being able to play as fast as I want to in certain situations. And just figure out something else
I'm going to have to resign myself after I get this Donna Lee down, resign myself to the fact that I'm probably not going to be able to play it up to tempo.
Right. And how many gigs do you need? How many gigs do you play that you need Donna Lee on?
Yeah. Well, Tommy, my old radio show host, he had learned it and he's like, dude, you got to learn Donna Lee. And I was like,
oh yeah.
I was like, all right. Yeah. So, and he learned it down an octave lower, and so I'm learning it up in the sax range, just so that one day we can play
do it together.
But I was I hadn't done anything that really requires that amount of focus, the classical mindset, right?
Yeah.
And some time, and I was like, you know what?
You have to
I need that.
You have to get really detailed and deep dive into how you're going to finger it. What's the most efficient way to finger this line, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
I stumbled across an old gig tape of me playing with a trio back in the early 80s. And there's a performance of Donna Lee that we did. It's like I was listening to it and I go,
is that me?
I don't think I can play that now.
Yeah.
I really don't. I wrote a blog when Kevin Mahogany died. I wrote a blog on Kevin Mahogany called Remembering Kevin. And I have all these old gig tapes. I played with him 89, 90, 91, around in there, 88 through 91 probably. Two different bands, best bands I've ever been in. They were just killer. It was like, I felt like I was the weak link, in these bands.
Yeah, but it's a good feeling.
Yeah,
as far as growth goes.
And I was listening. I went through all these old gig tapes and of playing with Kevin and ghetto blaster quality gig tapes and clubs and stuff. And I was like, man, I don't think I could play that now.
Yeah,
it was like you said, man. That's me. It's like, and as I get older. I'm just less concerned about all that. I was like, well, I can't play that fast anymore, but I don't really care. I'm more concerned about composition. Like when I solo, I want there to be a compositional quality to it. And I gone through various stages in my soloing where, like, I was real in the beginning of trying to figure out jazz. It was like how it's like I would listen to Pat Martino, I'd listen to George Benson, Wes Montgomery. It's like, man, I can hear the chord changes in these lines. There was a Pat Martino's version of Blue Bossa. He did it as a samba. It was real fast. It was an up samba. And the first two choruses of Pat's solo, the bass and the keyboards dropped out, and it was just drums and guitar. And, Pat is a ferocious single note line guy.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to these two choruses of the solo unaccompanied by anything but drums. And I can hear the chord changes.
Yeah.
In the line. And I'm like, how does he do that? And I started figuring that out, how to,
outline chords,
outline the chords in the line and all that stuff.
Which is essential even to that's another thing about the pentatonic players. They don't realize that targeting notes is that's the essence of
and arpeggio based lines, D minor.
There are a couple of notes in the scale that are not the best choices.
Right.
When you're playing an A minor thing and you're playing diatonically and you consistently are landing on the F and the D, and you're
the third of the chord is the primary target, for any and you hear melodies that way all the time. Like if you hear Autumn Leaf, right?
Yeah.
So you have third.
Yep.
Third.
Yep.
Third. Third. Right. And you have chords in between those. Third becomes the 7. Third becomes the 7. Third becomes the 7. So you could boil that melody down to this.
Yep. Because that's the emphasis.
Right. That's how important the third of the chord is. So that's one of the keys to playing through changes. But anyway, so I got to the point, excuse me, allergies. I got to the point where I was pretty comfortable playing that way. And then I started realizing, man, my solos are all sounding the same from song to song. Why is that? Well, it's because these songs have the same progressions. 2-5-1 is in everything. So what's to distinguish 2-5-1 in All the Things You Are from 2-5-1 in Alone Together? Well, the distinguishing thing is the melody. The distinguishing thing between 2-5-1 in one song and 2-5-1 in another song is the melody. So not only do you need to incorporate the harmony, the chordal aspects, of the chord in your line, you also need to reference the melody, because that'll make your solo in one song different from the solo in the other song, because you're referencing the melody, and that's the distinguishing thing. It's like, how many blues songs have the same changes,
Yeah. Brian Ruskin was talking about how when he learns a melody, then he figures out what interval each note in the melody is to the chord that's being played, and so that he can incorporate that into the solo itself.
Yep.
And so that way he's referencing the melody even by almost subliminal means, right?
Yeah. I went through a stage, where I was very consciously doing that. quoting little pieces of the melody in my improvisations, in addition to being cognizant or referencing the harmony, the chords. You have to get both those things going, and then it gets, once you get comfortable with that, then the next level, the way I think about these things, is to quote songs different from the song you're in.
Yeah.
You quote Alone Together in
Yeah.
Autumn Leaves or something, and that's another level of improv, and there's a lot of humor to it.
Yes.
And you can figure out the people in the crowd that are really listening because they get that.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, man, that's a very small percentage. But one of the things I do is I like to quote really popular songs.
Yeah.
That are pop, not from the jazz song.
I used to I was able to stick Flintstones into a lot of stuff.
Sure.
When we were
doing that. And I one of my favorites is Eleanor Rigby.
Yeah.
Stick that in the middle of some jazz standard, and people go, oh.
I know that.
Yeah. Or. They'll hear something like that.
I gotta tell you, maybe we'll finish with this. We gotta wrap it up because
this will
probably be a two-parter.
Okay,
but I'm not done. But I'm not done talking to you.
So we didn't get the sound together, so we didn't get to play.
No, that's what I'm saying.
That's okay.
We'll do another episode where we get a play. I might even cut this one in half because I think all the information is good, and I know where I got my music philosophy was, I'm sure, inspired by you in the early days. I'm sure we had lots of talks back in the day. This is the way it is, Brett. Yeah. What was I going to tell you? Now I can't even remember. What were we just talking about?
Quoting.
Oh, yeah. But one of my last Jazz Quest gigs, when Tommy and I were gigging a lot, and we were playing a lot of restaurants and corporate gigs and just all the gigs that you do,
Right.
And I liked being background noise because you're basically practicing on the stand.
Man, you're getting paid to do something you love.
You can play whatever you want, and nobody even notices. But we were at this place called Big Fish, and it had hardwood floors, and the silverware is the same frequency as the guitar. It's like, and it's just like totally. I mean, it's like almost identical frequency where it's like cutting out you can't hear the guitar at all. All you hear is silverware, and the hardwood floor is not helping. And so Tommy's like starts turning up to override the silverware, and as he does, the conversation in the room begins to rise, in competition with Tommy's amplifier. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm getting over this quickly. And so I started reaching my amp, and every time Tommy would turn up, I turned down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, my amp was completely on zero. Tommy's blasting. My amp is on zero, and the crowd is talking louder than ever. And then I was like, and so then I crank it up, and I just let out all my frustration and played a blazing solo. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And finish the song.
And you're fired.
No, and there's I would say there's silence, but it's just silverware and conversation. You know what I mean? And so I said, watch this, Tommy. And I go, and the place just lights up.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm done. That's it.
Yeah.
That was one of the last Jazz Quest gigs. I was just like, because it was like, you should have seen them as soon as they dun, dun,
right.
Dun, everyone was like, the silverware stopped and got everyone's attention. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm an improviser. Yeah.